October 1943. Deep inside the heart of Nazi Germany, the air trembles with the low hum of radar screens. On the second floor of a Luftwaffe command post outside Leipzig, Lieutenant Klaus Musch leans forward, staring at the phosphorescent blips crawling across the display. The pattern doesn't make sense. Those dots, those impossibly distant echoes, shouldn't be there. They are American bombers, dozens of them, flying in tight formation far beyond the range any escort fighter should be able to reach. Musch glances toward the watch officer. "They can't be real," he mutters. But the officer says nothing. The signals are steady. Real. The Americans are coming, hundreds of miles deeper than ever before, toward Berlin, Munich, the factories that feed the Reich's machine. Moments later, sirens rise over the city. Anti-aircraft crews scramble to their guns. Mechanics rush toward their Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, shouting over the metallic clatter of tools and engines coughing to life. Above the confusion, the sky opens with the drone of engines, first a dull vibration, then a roar that fills the world. But these aren't ordinary bombers. And they aren't alone. From the edge of the horizon, darting through thin sheets of cloud, come the silhouettes of sleek, silver fighters, machines no one in Germany has ever seen before. Their wings slice the air in perfect symmetry, long and narrow, carrying the strange glint of a new design. They are too fast, too controlled, too calm. When they dive, they don't scream, they whisper. That morning, the Luftwaffe discovers that something fundamental has changed. The Americans are no longer bleeding in the skies. They are hunting. The new aircraft escorts the bomber stream like a phantom. It appears where German fighters least expect it, high above, diving with surgical precision, turning what used to be easy kills into chaotic, one-sided battles. Within minutes, radio channels fill with panicked calls. German pilots report attacks from angles they didn't think possible. Machine guns cutting through wings before they can react. "Was ist das für ein Flugzeug?" One pilot yells through static. No one answers. It would take days, even weeks, before intelligence officers finally put a name to it. The North American P-51 Mustang. At first, it seems impossible. No American fighter could travel that far, escorting bombers from England to the deep interior of the Reich and back. Every piece of logic in Germany's air defense doctrine collapses at that realization. For years, the Luftwaffe had relied on one advantage: distance. They didn't need to destroy every bomber. They only had to outlast the escorts. Once the P-47 Thunderbolts and Spitfires turned back for lack of fuel, the bombers were exposed. Helpless steel boxes crawling through German airspace, now that safety was gone. By mid-morning, the fields outside the airbase are littered with burning wrecks. Messerschmitts crash land with engines torn open by heavy, 50-caliber rounds. Gun crews look up in disbelief as silver fighters dart through clouds, their wings glinting like blades of glass. The invulnerable Reich, the airspace they called impenetrable, is now vulnerable. From that day onward, the German Air Force begins its long, silent death. The pilots know it before the generals do. Every sortie grows shorter, every return trip emptier. Those who survive speak of a new kind of enemy machines that move like thought itself, fast, graceful, precise. The Mustangs, one says, fight like ghosts. But the real story of the P-51 Mustang doesn't begin in that German sky. It begins 3 years earlier, in a quiet office in California, where a desperate phone call from London will spark one of the most remarkable engineering miracles of the 20th century. The men who designed it had never built a fighter before. They were engineers of trainers and bombers, not hunters. Yet from that unlikely combination of British desperation, American industry, and the stubborn logic of necessity, something extraordinary would emerge, a machine that would not only change the war, but redefine the very limits of industrial civilization. Before the Mustang, the war in the air was mathematics: range, fuel, altitude, attrition. After the Mustang, it became something else entirely: momentum, precision, inevitability. The day Germany met the P-51 Mustang was the day the sky itself chose a side. By the end of 1943, The Allied bombing campaign over Europe had become a paradox of modern warfare. Technologically ambitious, strategically essential, and on the brink of collapse. The 8th Air Force America's spearhead in the sky was bleeding to death in the upper atmosphere. Squadrons of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators thundered across the Channel, aiming to cripple the industrial heart of Germany, but what awaited them beyond the Rhine was not the promise of victory. It was mathematics, cold, merciless mathematics. Every mission came with a calculation: altitude versus fuel, escort range versus German interception time, survival versus annihilation. In the clear blue over Schweinfurt, Regensburg, and Bremen, those equations resolved into fire and smoke. Entire bomber groups vanished before completing their runs. Losses reached 25% in a single day. 25 out of every 100 crews never came home. For every polished fortress that lifted off from an English airfield, 3 men would not return. Their absence haunted the tarmac, empty bunks, uneaten rations, letters that arrived to no one. The problem wasn't courage. It wasn't leadership. It was distance, the cruel geometry of range. Allied fighters like the P-47 Thunderbolt and the British Spitfire were masterpieces of design, powerful and elegant within their radius. But the air war over Europe required something that didn't yet exist: a fighter that could go the distance, protecting bombers from takeoff to target and back again. When the bombers crossed deep into German airspace, their escorts turned home, and that's when the Luftwaffe came. German fighters rose from dozens of airfields in coordinated waves: Messerschmitt Bf, 109 seconds, and Focke-Wulf, 190 seconds, climbing into the thin air above the Reich. Their mission was simple: tear apart the bomber streams before they could strike. They didn't need to win every dogfight. They only needed to keep the losses unsustainable. And for a time, they did. Each raid was a bloodletting. Pilots described the experience as watching the sky ignite planes disintegrating mid-air, vapor trails colliding with falling debris, the air itself thick with burning aluminum. Gunners fired until their barrels warped. Crews suffocated in smoke as oxygen masks failed. The strategy, the great belief system behind the Allied air offensive, was cracking. The bombing campaign was built on an article of faith: that industrial civilization could be dismantled from above, that precision bombing, guided by logic and engineering, could end a war faster than armies could march. Destroy the ball-bearing plants, the fuel refineries, the aircraft factories, and the enemy's machine would collapse under its own weight. But faith met physics. And physics, as always, was unforgiving. The British had learned this the hard way during their own night raids. The Americans, committed to daylight precision, were now learning it under full sunlight, learning that courage and conviction meant little when your aircraft burned before reaching the target. Each general in the 8th Air Force knew the truth. Without long-range fighter escort, the daylight campaign would die, and with it, the dream of crushing Germany from the air. Then came the contradiction that would change everything. The machine that would save the campaign, the P-51 Mustang, was not born from American doctrine at all. It was conceived from British desperation. In April 1940, as the Battle of Britain loomed, the Royal Air Force faced a dilemma. They needed fighters fast. Factories couldn't keep up, and American industry, still neutral, offered potential salvation. The British Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation with a simple request: produce P-42s under license, the American fighter already in use. But North American's president, James Dutch Kindleberger, refused. He believed his team could do better. Instead of building someone else's design, he proposed a new one, an aircraft that could outperform anything flying at the time. The British hesitated. The timeline was insane: 120 days from contract to first flight. Yet desperation has a way of rewriting the rules of possibility. Kindleberger assembled a team of engineers led by Edgar Schmude, a German-born designer who had once built racing aircraft before fleeing Hitler's Europe. Schmude understood speed like few others did. He didn't just design planes, he sculpted airflow. His philosophy was brutally simple: eliminate drag, maximize efficiency, Let physics work for you, not against you. The design that emerged from his drafting board was sleek, predatory, and efficient. Instead of the complex, rivet-heavy structures of contemporary fighters, Schmude's team used large, single-piece panels that could be built faster and smoother. The result was a skin of aluminum so clean that air slipped past it like water along polished stone. Beneath the fuselage, they placed a radiator not as a burden but as an asset angled so that the hot air rushing through it created a small but measurable thrust. A flaw in most aircraft became an advantage in the Mustang. In just 102 days, the prototype designated NA-73X took flight. Test pilot Vance Breeze lifted off from Mines Field, Los Angeles, and found something extraordinary. The aircraft was balanced, agile, and stable. It didn't feel like an experiment. It felt inevitable. But then came the flaw that nearly doomed it to mediocrity. The Allison V1710 engine. Reliable, yes, but gasping above 15,000 feet. The Mustang, at birth, could not breathe where the real war was fought. The British loved the airframe but dismissed its performance at altitude. The Americans saw promise but no miracle. The aircraft was relegated to reconnaissance and low-level attack roles, useful but unremarkable. And yet, the foundations were there. The bones of genius had already been laid. The Mustang only needed one final spark, the right heart, to become the weapon that would end Germany's hold on the skies. That spark would come not from Detroit or Washington, but from Derby, England, from the humming forges of Rolls-Royce, where a supercharged masterpiece waited to meet its American frame. But before the union of metal and engine, before the revolution in the air could begin, the Allied command had to face the terrifying truth. They were losing the war in the sky, and no amount of faith in production or courage could change that. What they needed wasn't another idea. What they needed was a miracle of steel and air, and they were about to get one. It began with a test flight in April 1942. At a quiet airfield in England, Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker climbed into the cockpit of a newly arrived American aircraft, one of those early Mustangs fitted with the Allison engine. The British had received a small batch for evaluation. Harker expected an average fighter, decent at low altitude, predictable, uninspired. But once airborne, something about the machine defied expectation. It handled like nothing else, smooth, balanced, aerodynamically clean. As Harker throttled up, the aircraft seemed to want to fly, to stretch its wings farther than its own engine would allow. He landed, walked straight into the test hangar, and said a sentence that would alter the course of the war. If this aircraft had the Merlin engine, it would be a world-beater. That statement set off a chain reaction through both British and American aviation circles. The Merlin Rolls-Royce's twin-stage supercharged masterpiece was the beating heart of the Spitfire and the Hurricane, the engine that had held back the Luftwaffe during the Battle of Britain. Unlike the Allison, the Merlin could breathe thin, cold air above 25,000 feet. It could climb with power when others gasped for oxygen. But installing it into the Mustang wasn't as simple as swapping parts. It required redesigning the soul of the aircraft. The airframe had to be rebalanced, the radiator reworked, the cowling reshaped to handle the Merlin's larger supercharger system. Every inch of airflow was recalculated. Yet what emerged from that union was nothing short of alchemy, the marriage of British engineering precision with American industrial boldness. In a world consumed by war, this collaboration was an act of defiance against the very divisions the Axis sought to impose. When the first Merlin-powered Mustangs took flight, the transformation was instant and violent. Climb rate doubled, top speed jumped by more than 70 miles per hour. At high altitude, where the B-17 seconds flew and where the Luftwaffe ruled, the Mustang no longer fell behind it hunted. It was as if a weapon had been waiting for its rightful engine, a blade finally meeting its hilt. The Mustang Mk-X, and later the P-51B, rolled out in 1943 as something wholly new, a long-range escort that could outfight anything in the sky. It could now accompany bombers deep into the heart of Germany and bring them home again. For the first time, the Allies possessed an aircraft that rendered the Luftwaffe's defensive logic obsolete. Yet this success carried its own contradiction. The Mustang wasn't born from American strategy or foresight. It was born from British urgency, foreign insight, and a hybrid of necessity. It was, in every sense, an accident of collaboration. American generals had doubted the idea of high-risk innovation. They had invested in proven machines like the P-47 and P-38, safe, solid, logical choices. The Mustang, meanwhile, had been a side project, a curiosity, and yet it was that outlier, the unwanted, underestimated design that would shatter the Luftwaffe's backbone. By late 1943, as the first Merlin-powered Mustangs entered combat, the effect was immediate and profound. Bomber losses on deep raids dropped from 20% to under 5%. The shift wasn't merely tactical, it was psychological. German pilots who once climbed confidently toward bomber streams now hesitated. Reports began to spread through Luftwaffe command channels. The Americans have a new fighter. It doesn't turn back. For the first time since the war began, the Germans were forced into a defensive posture in their own skies. Every aspect of the Mustang challenged existing doctrine. It combined range, power, and maneuverability in a single package, something thought impossible by aviation theorists on both sides. Before it, fighters were either long-legged or lethal, but never both. The Mustang was both. It wasn't supposed to exist. But in war, perfection rarely matters, only timing does. And the timing was merciless. The Luftwaffe had already begun to bleed. Fuel shortages, the loss of veteran pilots, the strain of defending both the eastern and western fronts, all of it eroded their once dominant edge. When the Mustang arrived, it didn't merely challenge them, it finished them. What makes this moment in history so extraordinary is that it wasn't driven by ideology or destiny. It was driven by engineering logic, meeting industrial power. The P-51 Mustang was not born from speeches or manifestos. It was born from wind tunnels, slide rules, and the unromantic genius of men who understood that the laws of physics, not politics, decide who owns the sky. And yet, behind that cold logic was something profoundly human. The belief that ingenuity, if properly applied, could turn defeat into dominance. The war in the air was no longer about courage. It was about systems, the ability to design, manufacture, and deploy better machines faster than your enemy could respond. When the Mustang first crossed into German skies with the roar of its Merlin engine echoing across the clouds, it wasn't just another aircraft joining the fight. It was civilization itself, accelerating proof that when industry and intellect converge under pressure, they can alter the fate of nations. The contradiction was resolved not by compromise, but by fusion. And from that fusion emerged the weapon that would decide who controlled the 20th century's most decisive battlefield, the sky. The P-51 Mustang was not merely an aircraft. It was an argument, a manifesto built from aluminum and mathematics. In its structure lay a code, an equation that defined how a civilization wages war when emotion gives way to logic. It was born from three invisible laws: range without sacrifice, power without waste, and production without compromise. Together, they did more than change air combat. They revealed the anatomy of a system the industrial mind of the 20th century made flesh and steel. Range without sacrifice. Before the Mustang, no fighter had truly mastered distance. Aviation doctrine treated endurance and agility as enemies. The farther you flew, the less you could fight. But Edgar Schmude, the German-born engineer behind the Mustang's frame, refused to accept that limitation. He treated air not as resistance, but as potential energy. The Mustang's laminar flow wing was the breakthrough. Instead of forcing air to tumble over its leading edge, the new design kept the flow smooth and obedient. The result was drag reduced by nearly a third, a silent, invisible revolution. The aircraft could slice through the atmosphere with an efficiency that defied precedent. It meant that for every gallon of fuel, the Mustang flew farther, faster, higher. When fitted with external drop tanks, it could range more than 1,600 miles, enough to follow the bombers from England to Berlin and back. That distance changed everything. The Luftwaffe's entire defensive network had been built on the assumption that Allied fighters could not follow the bombers deep into the Reich. Every radar grid, every interceptor base, every engagement plan depended on it. When the Mustang crossed that invisible threshold, the geometry of war inverted. The German sky, once a sanctuary, became a killing ground. Power without waste. The transformation came when the Merlin engine met the Mustang's frame. The Rolls-Royce Merlin, the mechanical heart that had saved Britain in 1940, was a machine that breathed logic into chaos. Its two-stage, two-speed supercharger gave the Mustang lungs at 30,000 feet, where air was thin and survival scarce. It turned what had been a limited, low-altitude craft into a predator that thrived where others choked. The synergy between airframe and engine bordered on perfection. The aircraft's ventral radiator, mounted beneath the fuselage, became a small miracle of physics. As the superheated air rushed through and expanded at the exit, it created a gentle forward thrust, the Meredith effect. The Mustang quite literally made thrust out of heat, turning waste into energy. In the cockpit, pilots didn't describe it as power, they described it as presence. The controls responded as if alive, steady even at the edge of stall, gentle even in violent dives. It flew like it wanted you to live, one pilot wrote. It was the only machine I ever trusted completely. The Mustang was not a beast to be mastered. It was a partner. It extended human instinct with mechanical grace. In its design, the boundary between man and machine blurred, and something new emerged. The industrial organism. Production without compromise. A weapon is only as powerful as its ability to be replicated. Here, the Mustang became unstoppable. North American aviation didn't just build aircraft, it industrialized precision. Factories in Inglewood and Dallas became cathedrals of repetition. Jigs held each component in perfect alignment. Conveyor lines turned craftsmanship into choreography. Workers, many of them women, built fighters with tolerances once reserved for laboratories. It was mass production elevated to art. By war's end, over 15,000 Mustangs had been forged, each nearly identical to the last. The quality didn't decline with quantity, it improved. It was as if the machine taught the system that made it. Across the Atlantic, Germany's industry fractured under bombing and bureaucracy. Their aircraft, ingenious, over-engineered, became victims of their own perfectionism. Factories built parts that couldn't fit across plants. Designs shifted faster than production lines could adapt. Precision without scale. Brilliance without replication. The Mustang represented the opposite. Democratic perfection. Its strength lay not only in what it was, but in how easily it could be multiplied. Every rivet that sealed its skin was a declaration that freedom, organized and methodical, could outperform tyranny's discipline. The system in combat. The first combat deployment came in December 1943. American bomber crews, long accustomed to suicide statistics, suddenly had silver angels watching their wings. German interceptors rose to meet them, BF 109 seconds and FOLAV 190 seconds, veterans of the Eastern Front. They expected routine slaughter. Instead, they found the sky already occupied. The Mustangs fell on them like predators out of sunlight, silent at first, then deafening as their 50 caliber guns tore through formations. Battles that had once lasted 20 minutes ended in 5. The Luftwaffe's pilots, once the masters of European airspace, found themselves hunted. February 1944. Big week. The Allies unleashed the full weight of their new system. Bombers struck Germany's aircraft plants day after day, while Mustangs hovered above, waiting for the defenders to rise. The result was annihilation not in a single battle, but in attrition so total that it drained the Luftwaffe of its lifeblood. Before the Mustang, bomber losses averaged 1 in 5. After it, 1 in 20. But more important than the statistics was what changed in the hearts of men. The Luftwaffe no longer fought for control. They fought to survive. Their veteran pilots were dying faster than they could be replaced. Fuel grew scarce. Training collapsed. And still, the Mustangs came relentless, mechanical, inevitable. The bombers they protected no longer crept through hostile airspace. They advanced like a front of civilization itself, a procession of steel escorted by a new kind of faith. Industrial civilization takes flight. In the Mustang, one can trace the evolution of the modern world. It was the first weapon to truly express the philosophy of the assembly line, a tool designed not just to kill, but to endure. Its beauty was incidental, born from optimization. Its lethality was procedural, born from organization, and its triumph, like that of the civilization that built it, was not born from brilliance alone, but from systems thinking, the capacity to turn innovation into structure and structure into dominance. Even German aces, stripped of pride, admitted the truth. Adolf Galland, once commander of the Luftwaffe's fighter force, said it plainly: "When we saw Mustangs over Berlin, we knew the war was lost." The silver wings that glinted above the Reich were not symbols of freedom. They were the visible edge of industrial logic, slicing through ideology, superstition, and fear. They represented something larger than victory. They were the proof that the machine had transcended its maker. For the first time in history, humanity's genius had produced a system that could outthink, outbuild, and outlast the individuals who conceived it. The P-51 Mustang was both the child and the herald of that transformation, the dawn of the mechanized age in its purest, most triumphant form. But beneath the beauty of its symmetry lay a warning. For every miracle of precision it delivered, it also revealed a new truth: that the same intelligence capable of liberation could just as easily manufacture destruction at scale, with efficiency, without remorse. The sky no longer belonged to men. It belonged to systems, and the Mustang was their first prophet. By 1944, the Luftwaffe was no longer a weapon. It was a memory trying to sustain itself in a sky that had already moved on. The war in the air, once a contest of daring and skill, had become a slow, mechanical suffocation. The Germans still launched fighters, but they no longer controlled when or where they fought. They responded like organs, still twitching after the brain has died. Every morning, airfields across the Reich, filled with the ritual of futility crews, pushing aircraft from hangars, mechanics, patching bullet holes with scavenged metal, young pilots climbing into machines they barely understood. Most of them had less than 20 hours of flight experience. Some had never even fired their guns in combat. They faced men who had flown hundreds of missions, men who had learned to kill with patience rather than fury. The imbalance was no longer tactical, it was existential. When the P-51 Mustang appeared above them, there was no warning, no strategy, no chance. Just the slow recognition of inevitability. Every war ends twice, first in the field and then in the mind. For Germany's fighter corps, the mental collapse came long before the physical one. The skies over Europe had once been the Luftwaffe's domain, a place where aces like Galland, Hartmann, and Barkhorn reigned with near-mythic authority. Their Messerschmitts were symbols of precision and pride, proof that individual mastery could overcome numerical inferiority. The Mustang erased that belief. It was not faster by sheer velocity, nor deadlier by a single stroke. It was deadlier because it never stopped coming. It was produced faster than it could be destroyed. Pilots replaced, parts replaced, engines replaced. The Luftwaffe faced not men, but momentum. For every Mustang shot down, 2 more arrived. For every German ace lost, there were no replacements left to take their place. This was not defeat by combat, it was defeat by scale. The Mustang turned the war of skill into a war of systems, and the Germans were systems without resources. Their fuel reserves dwindled. The factories at Regensburg and Schweinfurt, once the pulse of their aircraft industry, lay in ruins. Even the Luftwaffe's vaunted jet program, the Me-262, could not save them. They built them too late, too few, with pilots too inexperienced to matter. The world had crossed a threshold, from the age of the warrior to the age of the engineer. The Mustang's dominance also revealed something darker beneath the statistics of victory. For every air battle won, there were cities burning beneath. The bombers the Mustang protected now struck with impunity. Hamburg, Cologne, Dresden. Entire urban grids turned into rolling furnaces. The line between soldier and civilian dissolved in the heat. The Mustang's success had made the unthinkable possible, sustained strategic bombing deep into the heart of a nation. Precision became pretext. Industrial targets merged with population centers. Entire generations vanished under the logic of total war. Historians would later debate whether the Mustang shortened the conflict or prolonged the destruction. What's certain is that it enabled the Allies to keep bombing long after the Luftwaffe could no longer fight back. The sky became one-sided. The raids no longer represented battle, they represented administration, a routine, death at scale, managed like production. And yet, within this horror, there was also revelation. The Mustang's very existence proved what industrial democracy could achieve when its back was against the wall. It demonstrated that the fusion of innovation, organization, and moral conviction could overcome the precision of authoritarian regimes. But that revelation carried its own irony. The same system that built the Mustang, the vast machinery of logistics, planning, and mass production, could now destroy as effortlessly as it created. The Allies had not just built a better machine, they had built a better process for destruction. By late 1944, the air war was no longer a duel, it was a cleansing. Mustangs patrolled above Germany from dawn until dusk. They strafed convoys, supply lines, rail yards. They hunted anything that moved. Their 6.50 caliber machine guns carved the roads into molten strips of metal and dust. The Luftwaffe's final defense was desperation. 12-year-old boys with Panzerfausts, old men manning anti-aircraft guns, pilots flying one-way missions in aircraft with barely enough fuel for the return trip. The end was visible even from the cockpit. Pilots spoke of flying over entire regions, where no enemy aircraft rose to meet them. Just silence, smoke, and the skeletons of factories that once powered an empire. The Mustang had become both sword and signal. It didn't just destroy the Luftwaffe, it announced to the world that the future belonged to nations that could industrialize thought, manufacture precision, and weaponize intelligence. But in that triumph, a haunting truth emerged. The same logic that won the war also mechanized it. And once mechanized, war no longer needed heroes, only engineers, planners, and production quotas. When Germany finally collapsed in 1945, the Mustang's shadow stretched across every industrial skyline. It was the end of the old order, the death of the ace, the fading of chivalry, the silence of individuality beneath the roar of mass systems. In the ruins of Europe, the Mustang circled one last time above the cities it had helped to devastate. It was more than a machine, it was a mirror reflecting the century to come. The war was over, but the system it revealed would never sleep again. When the smoke cleared over Europe, the world was left with two legacies: the ruins of cities and the rise of systems. The P-51 Mustang stood between them not as a monument to war, but as the visible edge of an idea that would shape the modern age. The aircraft had proven that victory no longer belonged to the bravest or the boldest, but to the most organized. In its aluminum frame and whistling radiator, the 20th century discovered its philosophy. Power is no longer about force, it is about process. The Mustang's story began with desperation and ended in dominance, but its real meaning lies in what it revealed about civilization itself. It showed that intelligence, when mechanized and multiplied, could outthink chaos. It taught that systems, once properly aligned, could outperform even the most passionate human will. The age of the craftsman ended in the sky over Germany. The age of the engineer began. Every part of the Mustang reflected a hierarchy of logic, aerodynamic purity, modular manufacturing, logistical integration. It wasn't the brilliance of one man or one nation. It was the coordination of thousands, each performing a function so precisely defined that the whole became greater than its makers. In that sense, the P-51 was more than a machine of war. It was the first complete expression of the industrial mind, where beauty and efficiency were no longer opposites, but reflections of the same law. To understand the Mustang is to understand the paradox of progress. The same rationality that liberated humanity from scarcity also built the mechanisms of destruction with terrifying precision. The same discipline that allowed factories to birth thousands of perfect machines also reduced human beings to production units, numbers, and schedules. Civilization, in the age of the Mustang, had finally perfected the art of turning thought into output. This is the duality at the heart of the industrial philosophy. Efficiency is neutral. Only purpose gives it meaning. In the Mustang, that efficiency served freedom. It allowed the Allies to shatter the Luftwaffe, cripple the Nazi war machine, and clear the skies for the liberation of Europe. But in its reflection, one could already glimpse the darker logic of the century ahead, where industrial mastery would no longer distinguish saviors from destroyers, only the successful from the obsolete. The lesson is not simply that machines change history. It is that machines become history because they redefine how human beings measure time, power, and destiny. Before the Mustang, victory was measured in courage. After it, victory was measured in production cycles, fuel efficiency, and altitude ratios. The machine had turned war into arithmetic. This was not a loss of humanity, it was humanity's evolution into something colder, more systemic. For the first time, entire civilizations could be steered not by myth or charisma, but by data and discipline. The Mustang was a glimpse into that future, a mechanical prophet whispering the shape of things to come, logistics as ideology, process as belief. And yet, beneath the steel and structure, there was still something profoundly human. Every Mustang that took flight carried the fingerprints of the men and women who built it, workers who believed that their labor had meaning beyond survival. Pilots who risked their lives not for conquest, but for the fragile idea that freedom could be defended by order. The aircraft's success was not born of greed or empire, but of necessity, the purest form of creation, born when destruction demands an answer. It proved that in times of crisis, democracies can think as fast as dictatorships can act, that free societies, when organized, can outproduce tyranny without becoming tyrannical themselves. The Mustang was the proof of concept for that moral equation, that liberty need not be inefficient, and that precision can coexist with purpose. Looking back, the P-51 Mustang is more than a relic of a distant war. It is a warning, a mirror, and a manifesto. It warns that every technological triumph carries a moral cost. It mirrors the tension between human ambition and machine logic. And it declares, with the cold certainty of its engine's roar, that progress cannot be separated from responsibility. In its wake, every age of innovation, nuclear, digital, artificial, has faced the same question the Mustang posed over the skies of Europe. Can civilization control the systems it creates, or will the systems one day control civilization? That is the real lesson of the Mustang, not that machines can win wars, but that they can inherit the logic of the societies that build them. If tyranny designs machines to dominate, and democracy designs them to defend, then the true frontier of civilization lies not in steel or circuitry, but in intention. When the Merlin engine finally fell silent, and the last Mustang touched down, what remained was not a fighter, but a philosophy. That technology, when guided by collective purpose, can transcend destruction. It was never just about speed, range, or firepower. It was about proof that reason, discipline, and cooperation could triumph over the machinery of fear. The P-51 Mustang became more than an aircraft. It became an argument for the endurance of freedom, an assertion that intelligence, once organized, could not be enslaved. And in that, perhaps, lies its truest victory. Not the domination of the skies, but the survival of the idea that built it. In the years after the war, silence settled over Europe, a silence so vast it seemed to hum. The factories that had once thundered with production lines now echoed with ghosts. Airfields emptied, runways cracked. The sky, once torn apart by the scream of engines, returned to stillness. But somewhere in that silence, the sound of the P-51 Mustang lingered, faint, metallic, eternal. It was the sound of a civilization discovering what it had become. The Mustang's silver wings no longer hunted across Europe, but they did not vanish. They were repainted, sold, modified, and flown into a new century. Some became civilian racers, their war paint replaced by corporate sponsors. Others served as trainers or recon aircraft in new wars fought in different skies. Korea, even the Middle East. Yet, wherever they flew, they carried the same echo, the hum of a system perfected under fire. To engineers, it remained a benchmark proof that beauty could emerge from efficiency. To historians, it was a hinge in time, the moment when humanity crossed from mechanical war to industrial civilization. To pilots, it was something almost spiritual, a machine that, for a brief and terrible moment, erased the boundary between man and metal. The Mustang was the last of its kind and the first of ours. As the jet age dawned, it became a relic overnight. The Me-262, the Meteor, and the Sabre would soon claim the sky, but none of them carried what the Mustang did, the sense that technology could still be human, that speed and grace could coexist. When pilots described it decades later, their voices softened. They didn't speak of its kill ratios or range. They spoke of its feel, the way it responded like a living thing, the way it made them believe they could cheat death through precision. One veteran, standing beside a restored P-51 inches a museum hangar, once said, "It wasn't just a plane, it was the sound of civilization accelerating." He wasn't wrong. The Mustang's story is the story of modernity itself, the dream and the warning. It proved that reason could be stronger than tyranny, but also that reason could build machines beyond its own control. Its silhouette still appears in films, murals, and air shows, not just as nostalgia, but as memory of a turning point when humanity first realized the scale of its own capability. It is the emblem of a paradox. Progress as salvation, progress as threat. Every age since has lived inside that paradox. The computers that guide our weapons, the algorithms that shape our economies, the networks that bind our lives, all are descendants of the same logic that built the Mustang. Systems that amplify intelligence, accelerate output, and promise control. Yet control is always temporary. The sky the Mustang once conquered has long since been left to drones and satellites, machines that no longer need pilots. The connection between mind and mechanism has grown colder, more abstract, but in that growing distance, one truth endures, that even in the most mechanized act of destruction, there was once humanity terrified, brilliant, flawed, trying to survive. When the last operational Mustangs were retired, some were melted down, others placed in museums. But a few still fly carefully maintained, their Merlin engines roaring across open fields during commemorations. People stop and look up, shielding their eyes from the sun, watching that streak of silver cut across the blue. They don't see a weapon. They see a question. What did we build, and what did it build in us? The P-51 Mustang was the voice of an age that believed machines could redeem the world. It was right, and it was wrong. It saved Europe from tyranny, but it also revealed that salvation, once industrialized, can never again be innocent. That is the echo the Mustang left behind, not the roar of victory, but the whisper of responsibility. The war ended. The machine remained. And the world it created is the one we still inhabit.